Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session and the Banking Committee be discharged from further consideration of PN 1093, the nomination of Mark McWaters for the Board of Directors at the Export-Import Bank, and that the Senate proceed to its consideration and vote without intervening action or debate, that if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order to the nomination, that any statements related to the nomination be printed in the record, and that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from North Dakota.
we'd like to engage in just a discussion of what this means to American workers, to American export and American manufacturing. I think we've worked very, very hard over the last several months to try and move this nomination forward. We fought this fight. Many appearing with me today fought this fight, whether it was on TPA or whether it was just simply trying to get reauthorization of the EXIM Bank advanced and furthered. We won this fight, and today we're losing the fight again by this restriction, by this inability to move this nomination forward. And so we want to talk about this today. I'm going to yield to several of my colleagues here for their short comments, and we'll start with Senator Schumer, whose comment, I know he has a commitment with the Judiciary Committee.
Thank you. I want to thank my dear friend, the senator from North Dakota, for her leadership on this issue, as well as our two great senators from the state of Washington, Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray. And I support my colleague from North Dakota and echo her comments. We should have a full complement of board members at the EXIM Bank, and at the very least, they must have enough to reach a quorum and continue to conduct its business. I also want to thank my three colleagues who are here for their tireless efforts to get the EXIM Bank reauthorized last year. The legislation to reauthorize was carried by the senator from North Dakota, as well as Senators Cantwell and Murray, after Republican obstruction caused it to lapse for the first time in its 80-year history. And what a shame it was that it lapsed. The EXIM Bank is one of the key tools in our toolbox for supporting and growing manufacturing jobs across the country. We talk about increasing good-paying manufacturing jobs. Both sides of the aisle do that regularly. And then when it comes to supporting the EXIM Bank, one of the best tools we have, they obstruct it, they vote no, and now they have found a clever way to stop it from working because it won't have a quorum. The EXIM Bank provides necessary financing for domestic manufacturers to compete with foreign companies that are heavily subsidized or owned entirely by their governments, simply to have access to their own domestic import bank. To purposely prevent the EXIM Bank from being able to properly function is like having America unilaterally disarm in the global competition for exports and good-paying manufacturing jobs here at home. But there's a small band of folks, ideologues, so ideologically opposed to the bank, they'll do anything to see that it can come to a screeching halt. They will use every trick in the book to do it, and that's what they're doing now. Opponents of the bank are hamstringing the agency by denying it the staff it needs to operate. Mr. President, I know I have a whole lot of things to say here. I am going to ask unanimous consent because I see my colleagues waiting to put the thing in the record, to put my remarks in the record. But I just want to say we're losing $50 million a day in exports. Some of those come from my home state of New York. We have not only GE, which makes turbines, a large percentage of which are exported and they're losing business to Siemens and other foreign companies. But we have lots of little companies that depend even more on the EXIM Bank because it gives them the ability to go find markets overseas. So I don't want to hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talking about how they care about jobs, how they care about building America and building our exports as long as they continue to play this trick and hamstring the Ex-Im Bank from functioning. I ask unanimous consent my entire statement be put in the record.
Without objection.
President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm here today to support the strong statement from the senator from North Dakota and in strong support of a fully functioning Export-Import Bank because it creates American jobs and helps our businesses, large and small, and, in fact, reduces our national debt. But right now, political posturing has handicapped the Ex-Im Bank, one of our country's most reliable tools to increase America's economic competitiveness in our global economy. In my home state of Washington, there are nearly 100 businesses, the majority of them small or medium-sized, who used the bank's services last year to help sell their products overseas. We're talking about everything from apples to airplane parts, beer, wine, software, medical training supplies, and beyond. The reality is, people in other countries want American-made products, and that's a great thing because these businesses support tens of thousands of jobs in our country and keep our economy moving. Mr. President, the Export-Import Bank is the right kind of investment because it expands American businesses' access to emerging foreign markets that create jobs right here at home. And you know what it costs taxpayers? Not a single penny. In fact, the Ex-Im Bank reduces our national debt. So here's the bottom line. The bank creates jobs, it strengthens our businesses, it helps our economy grow from the middle out, not just the top down. So it's time for my colleagues to put ideology aside, allow this proven program to operate at its full capacity, to allow a vote that we were denied today to get the Ex-Im board operating again, because it's critical that the bank continues to receive the strong bipartisan support we have seen in the past as we work to build on its success. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I joined my colleagues this morning on the Senate floor in an effort to wake up the United States Senate to the fact that without action by this body, and specifically the Banking Committee, members are literally supporting shipping jobs overseas. I believe in a manufacturing economy. I believe in a manufacturing economy because so many people in the state of Washington work in manufacturing, and because aerospace is an industry in which the United States is still a world leader. But yet we are, by not filling the board of a credit agency, putting it out of business in making sure that it can ensue credit for manufactured U.S. products to be sold in overseas markets. Why is manufacturing so important? Manufacturing is important because it pays a decent wage. It allows American workers to go from working class to middle class. It helps secure jobs in our economy that are stable for families to send their kids to school, to help people move up into a better quality of life. And so I'm competitive in general. I don't want to lose a manufacturing base, but I also don't want to lose a middle class. And what's happened as we have tried to thwart here with conservative views of the Heritage Foundation, the Export-Import Bank, is U.S. manufacturers have decided to put their manufacturing overseas. Think about it. How long is a company or a business going to put up with the fact that they don't have a credit agency here in the United States? Now, can a business that is a big manufacturer get its own credit? Sure it can. Sure, they can go and get credit. But if you are asking them to sell on a global market, I'll give you an example of a manufacturer in our state, Scafco, which sells manufactured grain silos to many countries in South America, in Africa, in Asia, and all across the world. So do you think they're going to finance every single deal that they do? No, because they have to put money into their manufacturing facilities so they can stay competitive, so that they can have the best silos being produced. So if they limited their business to only deals that they could finance, they'd have very limited business. Think about it. Who do we make that requirement of? It's the customer who is buying that needs to get credit. It's the customer that is out there that wants to purchase what is great U.S. product that is having trouble. And think about it. You're a small African nation trying to change your economy into agriculture, or you're a small Asian country that is trying to upgrade your quality of life. It could be, just as Prime Minister Modi said yesterday, it could be that they want to diversify their energy portfolio. Well, guess what? We're holding that up and not allowing all of those countries to buy U.S. products simply because we refuse to have a working board at the Export Credit Agency. And how ludicrous is that? It's so ludicrous because what happens is a U.S. manufacturer, for example, say aerospace manufacturer like Boeing, they would love to buy GE engines and make sure that, say, a South American country purchases Boeing and GE engines. Well, they can go and purchase Rolls-Royce engines, and the European Credit Agency can fund the deal. Now what's happened? GE is lost out on deals. Do you think all these U.S. manufacturers are going to stay in the United States as if there isn't a way to have credit financing? No, they're going to go where credit financing exists. So by not moving forward on a full functioning export credit agency in the United States, all you're doing is helping to ship jobs overseas. It's got to stop. We make great products in the United States. We are competitive. Our workforce is skilled. I'll be the first to say we need to skill it more, and I'm all for educating and skilling our workforce with every resource our country has, because that innovation is our competitive advantage. But if we make great products, but then we hamstring the financing of those great products because developing countries don't have the same banking and financial tools that we have in the United States, you're basically saying we're not going to sell product. So I am a big proponent of winning in the international marketplace. I'm a big proponent of saying the middle class is growing around the globe, and one of the United States' biggest economic opportunities is to sell product outside of the United States, as that rise in the middle class means they can purchase more U.S. products. Well, they can't if we don't have a credit agency that finances it. So why are we down here this morning as it relates to, the defense bill that's being discussed? Well, we're here because there are more than 10 million deals and transactions in the export-import pipeline. That is to say that $10 billion of deals that are in the Export-Import Bank. Yesterday, Prime Minister Modi was here. The Indian government has announced that Westinghouse could finalize contracts with nuclear power corporations to India. Well, those deals won't get done if you don't have an export credit agency to do those deals. And the U.S. is considering right now in the Senate the National Defense Authorization Act. And last month, the Aerospace Industry Association and the National Defense Association wrote letters to our leadership here in the Senate urging them to make sure that we had a functioning bank. They pointed out that without a quorum, multi-million-dollar exports of aircraft, satellite, other things also won't get done. So we just had this little argument on the Senate floor about how we're going to pay for things in the defense bill and whether we're going to have balance with our other domestic spending. By not supporting and moving forward on the export credit agency, you are also making defense in the United States more expensive. You are making our security more expensive because you're not allowing that same technology that we have decided meets our export controls, but we are willing, because these are partners of ours, to sell that defense. You're making that difficult. So I'd like to enter into the record this letter from the aerospace industry and the national defense industry basically saying that you are making it more expensive for us to do business as a country in defense because you also won't allow for the export of this product.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think, Mr. President, I'm here with my colleague from North Dakota because we feel passionately about this issue. We are frustrated with the shenanigans that has gone on with the Export Credit Agency. I say shenanigans because, for a long time people said, oh, well, there's not the votes. We can't get this done. We don't have the votes. Well, when you lifted the veil behind some very, conservative, threatening tactics, there were the majority in both the United States Senate and the House of Representatives support for this export credit agency. And now, because one committee is trying to bottle up a nominee, if he doesn't like the nominee, come up with a different name. If he doesn't like, come up with a different, come up with two names. Who cares? But what really is happening is that those on the other side of the aisle are enabling one individual to thwart the biggest manufacturing economic opportunity that our country has to secure manufacturing jobs in the United States of America. Let's build great products. Let's have a credit agency that can finance deals to developing nations, and let's get those countries buying U.S. product. Why on earth are we continuing this shenanigans, all so somebody can say to the Heritage Foundation, I got you one more trophy for your shelf? That is not what America is about. America is about competing and succeeding and growing economic opportunity. And I want to thank my colleague from North Dakota for her leadership on the Banking Committee and trying to move this effort forward, and all my colleagues who care about manufacturing, who are willing to come down to the floor and make this point. Time is running out for this session, for us before the summer recess, to get this done. It is time to get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. President, and
Senator from North Dakota.
Thanks to my colleague from Washington. The level of frustration that we have over this issue is really unparalleled. We hear platitudes here in the United States Senate. They usually start with, we believe in the will of the people. Let's do the will of the people. Well, guess what? We had this debate. We had the debate about whether we should have an entity called the Export-Import Bank. We had that debate. It was long fought. We shut down the bank for the first time in 60 years. We shut down the bank, stopping exports from the United States of America, costing jobs in the United States of America. We won that fight, and we didn't win it by a little. We didn't win it by just a margin. We won supermajorities in the Senate and supermajorities in the House. When we were told the House would never pass a standalone bill, they passed a standalone bill by 70%. 70% of the vote. Now, doesn't that tell you that the people of this country should have a vote through their elected representatives? And today, you know what's stopping the will of that vote, the will of the people? To have this entity, beyond all the arguments for why this entity is critically important, one person. One person, for whatever reason. This is why people have lost faith with their government. This is why people don't believe that we can get anything done here anymore. Because even though we fight the fight, even though we win the fight, we don't win the fight because we need a quorum at the bank to do any deal over $10 million. We have a nominee, and you might say, well, it must be a raving liberal, right, this nominee? No, it's the Republican nominee that represented and worked with and worked for one of the most conservative members, in fact, an anti-export-import member of the House of Representatives. That's our nominee. There's nothing wrong with this nominee. It's not our side who's debating the legitimacy of a Republican nominee. It's not our side. So how do we really believe in manufacturing and believe in the American dream and believe that we can be part of a global economy when 95% of all potential consumers in the United States of America, or in the world, guess what? They don't live here. And if we're going to be competitive, if we're going to be participating in that global economy, which we must, then we must be competitive. We cannot be competitive without an export credit agency. It's just that simple. And we're not going to be competitive. And so don't say you're for trade or manufacturing when you're not willing to take a risk because some ideologue on the other side has decided that that's a black mark. Earlier, Senator McCain made a passion plea, and Senator Lindsey Graham talked about heritage. Who's running this place? When the Heritage Society can stop deliberation by simply putting a check mark next to a piece of legislation, and when we have this being once again held up in the back rooms of the United States Senate, not openly, but in the back rooms, who's running the place? And who really believes in trade? Who really believes in manufacturing? Who really believes in the middle class? And I'll tell you, my passion on this doesn't just come because I think it is a horrible, horrible trajectory for the future of our American economy. My passion on this comes when I hear stories, and these are real. They are not pretend stories. When I hear stories that we're going to take our manufacturing out of this country, and we're going to lose jobs, and we're going to lose those jobs very quickly. In fact, we already, when we shut down the bank, lost jobs. But we're going to lose jobs. And you know what I think about? Because this is where I live. This is where I'm from. That factory worker on the floor of that manufacturing facility being given a pink slip and told his job's going overseas, her job's going overseas, because they have a better business climate. Think about that. Have a good job, providing for your family, believe you're doing everything right, and because of a simple glitch here, because of really one person, that person's getting handed a pink slip. Where's the accountability for that? Where's the accountability to that family? When are we going to learn that it is this disruption in American lives that have cost this body and this Congress its reputation? For no good reason. For no good reason. Let me just close before I turn it over to my colleagues here with just a couple of statistics, because I get, quite honestly, sick and tired of the characterization that this only applies to large facilities like Boeing and GE and Caterpillar. You know, I am tired of that. Let me tell you, in North Dakota, we have 16 suppliers. These are small businesses. These are people who have done creative things in an environment that you wouldn't think would be successful. And they're suppliers to Boeing. What happens when Boeing can't do a deal? What happens when Boeing moves their operation someplace else and the requirement is that those parts be manufactured in that country? What happens? Guess what? Those 16 manufacturers are injured. Those 16 manufacturers have their lives disrupted through no fault of their own. Not because they didn't produce a quality product, not because they didn't do everything that they needed to do to be successful. You know, just last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that 350 high-paying American manufacturing jobs are headed to Canada. That's a direct result in the lapsed reauthorization back in 2015. I think we can clearly expect many more of these stories, many more of these stories. And I would just ask my colleagues, who is going to go to that manufacturer worker? Who's going to talk to the children who now have a father who no longer has a job, or a mother who no longer has a job, and said, because someone told me, I'm not going to do it. I am not going to support you. I don't represent you. I represent an ideology here. And so this is a tragedy at so many levels. But, you know, I guess I naively thought when you win, you win. And when you win by big majorities, you ought to win for at least more than a day. And so I stand ready to fight this fight. I stand ready to attach and do everything that I can to either get this nomination or to get a patch or legislation that will, in fact, provide opportunities for the bank to function. I will do everything that I can, because when I go to bed at night, I don't think about Boeing and the GE executives. That's not who I think about. I think about that person on the factory line who is working every day, putting food on the table for their children, and how this dysfunction here is costing them their livelihood and their security. That is a tragedy that we can't ignore. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor to my colleague from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to echo the words of my colleague from North Dakota. I have 6.5 million bosses back in Indiana. These think tanks out here, these other organizations, they're not my boss. That family who wants to make sure there's a paycheck coming into the house, and all mom and dad wants is a chance to go to work. They're who we should be working for here. For the same people that my colleague from North Dakota works for in Bismarck and in Fargo, in Muncie and in Richmond and in Maryville and in Lafayette and in all these suppliers all around my state whose jobs are dependent on these export opportunities that we are walking away from by standing against the Export-Import Bank. Here we are again on the floor of the United States Senate talking about our responsibility to do our job and to consider the president's nominees to important federal offices. The nominee we're talking about, Mark McWaters, is a Republican nominee for the board of directors of the Export-Import Bank. And we are all lined up on this side to support him. It's the official export credit agency of the United States. It helps American companies, so many in my state of Indiana, creating jobs and opportunity and the chance for people to go to work, put a roof over their kids' heads, to be able to retire with dignity, to be able to compete in the global economy. That's what this is about. Every other country you look at has one of these export-import banks, is helping their organizations, their businesses in their countries compete. Each of us speaking today worked closely with Senator Heitkamp last year to reauthorize the bank. It was a strong, overwhelming, bipartisan vote in support of reauthorization. It demonstrated the need for this entity that helps create American jobs at no cost to taxpayers and, in fact, sends money back to the Treasury. In 2014, the Ex-Im Bank supported 164,000 American jobs. That's 164,000 moms and dads who are able to have dignity, a job, take care of their children, be a tremendous credit to their community. That's what this is about. $27.5 billion in exports and returned $675 million to the U.S. Treasury. It creates jobs, reduces deficits, spurs economic growth. Despite widespread support, our inaction here keeps the bank from being operational. In order to approve certain financing, the bank needs a minimum of 3 Senate-approved board members. We have 2. Mr. McWaters' nomination has been pending in the Senate Banking Committee for 5 months. All it takes is a vote. Requests to confirm the nominee via unanimous consent have been rejected. American companies are struggling to compete against foreign competitors that benefit from currency manipulation, illegal trade, intellectual property theft, and other foreign barriers. Yet a handful of senators are making life more difficult by not considering this nomination. If we are not willing to stand up for our own companies, for our own workers, then what are we doing? It is disappointing that an important tool for economic growth isn't being utilized simply because some here in the Senate refuse to do our job. The American people expect better, the American people deserve better, and the workers of this country deserve better. I yield back.
The senator from Utah.
Mr. President, first, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Frederick L. Dressler, a National Security Fellow in the Office of Senator Ayotte, be granted privileges on the floor during consideration of S-2943, the National Defense Authorization Act.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what my distinguished colleagues from North Dakota and Indiana are proposing is to unleash the Export-Import Bank from the constraints under which it currently must operate, to begin authorizing transactions above $10 million. Between 2007 and 2014, 84% of the bank's subsidy and loan guarantee deals exceeded $10 million, 84%. And the vast majority of those were given to the wealthiest, most well-connected businesses in America that should have no problem at all obtaining financing in the open market. Mr. President, the Export-Import Bank represents so much of what the American people resent and despise about Washington, D.C. This is a Great Depression era relic, one that lives on today. And it's grown into one of the most treasured relics for favoring banks. And it's a favored relic for well-heeled lobbyists, big government, and politically favored businesses. It's an 82-year-old case study in American corporate welfare. And for some reason, this Senate continues to support it. Ex-Im has managed to live through more than 30 corruption and fraud investigations into its system of doling out taxpayer-backed subsidies and loan guarantees to foreign buyers of U.S. exports. And in 2013, for half of the financing deals within the Export-Import Bank's portfolio, Ex-Im was either unable or unwilling to provide any justification whatsoever connected to its mission. Mr. President, that's $18.8 billion in estimated export value that apparently had no connection to Ex-Im's mission. Or if it did, Ex-Im didn't bother to offer that up. Many of Ex-Im's supporters claim that the bank's main function is to support small business. That sounds nice, but the problem with it is that this claim doesn't stand up to even a modest amount of scrutiny. Look at the institution's track record. Only 0.5% of all small businesses in America benefit from Ex-Im financing. 0.5%. And even that tiny figure may well be an overestimation, may well overstate the case, because Ex-Im uses such a broad definition of the term small business. Mr. President, confirming this nominee would allow Ex-Im to return to its old ways of approving massive financing deals for the largest corporations in coordination with the largest banks, all with the backing of American taxpayers. Permanently ending the Export-Import Bank would be a small but important and symbolic step toward restoring fairness to our economy and fairness to our government. It would prove to the American people that their elected representatives in Congress have the courage to eliminate one of the many federal programs that foster cozy relationships between political and economic insiders, providing a breeding ground for cronyism and for corruption. But so long as this Senate remains unwilling to close Ex-Im, we should at the very least make sure that it does not have the ability to further advance its cronyist agenda. Now, you want to talk about harming competitiveness? Let's talk about that. If we want to have that discussion, let's have that discussion now. You want to know what harms competitiveness in America, including and especially the kind of competitiveness that has tended to foster the development of the greatest economy the world has ever known? The kind of competitiveness that makes it possible, where it exists, for small businesses to make it onto the big stage? Let's look at federal regulations. Federal regulations are a big deal in this country. I remember being appalled 20 years ago to learn that the federal regulatory system was imposing some $300 billion a year in corporate compliance costs, regulatory compliance costs. Now, those regulatory compliance costs might be borne immediately, initially, by big corporations, by small corporations, mostly by businesses. But you know who pays for it, Mr. President? Hardworking Americans. In fact, some have described this effect as sort of a backdoor, invisible, and very regressive tax on the American people. So when I first learned of this problem, I started thinking of it this way. This is an additional $300 billion a year that the American people are paying essentially into the federal government because everything they buy, goods and services, become more expensive. They also pay for it in terms of diminished wages, unemployment, and underemployment. But they do pay for it. And they pay for it disproportionately at the middle and at the low end of the economic spectrum in America. Because unlike our actual tax system, our visible tax system, which is highly progressive, our backdoor invisible tax system, our regulatory system, is highly regressive. Some have estimated that This regulatory compliance cost, just complying with federal regulations, today costs the economy some $2 trillion a year, meaning that this is multiplied roughly sevenfold just in the last 20 years. Mr. President, if you don't think that is a significant impediment to competitiveness in America, I don't know what is. This is a problem. Some have estimated that each and every American household pays some $15,000 more each year for the goods that it purchases simply because of federal regulations. This, Mr. President, hurts competitiveness, and so do our high tax rates. These harm competitiveness, and so, Mr. President, I stand with the senior senator from Alabama, and I support him in his objection. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
The senator from North Dakota.
would the senator from Utah yield for a question? I would tell you that I share your concern about overregulation and the burden of regulation. Been fighting regulation that makes no sense here in Congress. I agree with you. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the Export-Import Bank. And I would ask you, what percentage of all transactions at the bank, at the Export-Import Bank, what percentage go to small business, as defined by the bank?
Well, look, as you're asking that question, I assume you have the answer.
I do.
And I'm sure you're prepared to tell it to me. So,
well, obviously, I do want to maybe make some points that are contrary to some of the discussion that you just had. 90% of all XM transactions are with small business that are under 10 million. And the amount of transactions over 10 million is huge. I'll give you that. But again, we talk about the supply chain that goes into those transactions over $10 million. The Peterson Institute recently estimated that the United States is losing 50 million in exports each day that this nomination is not confirmed. And we have disagreements with the senator from Utah over the XM Bank, disagreements that we debated when we reauthorized the bank. And so I would ask this senator from Utah, why not move the confirmation of McWaters to the floor so you can have a full-throated debate again about the bank? Why not have a full-throated debate instead of hiding that nomination in the banking committee, using that structure to thwart what, in fact, the majority of both bodies of the Congress and the president have done when they reauthorized the bank?
I'm grateful to respond to both points from my distinguished colleague, the senator from North Dakota. In the first place, as to the need to have a full-throated debate, I welcome it. It's exactly what we need. It's what I've been wanting to have for a long time. Instead, last year, instead of having a full-throated debate specifically about XM, we saw XM attached to a much larger package that a lot of people were determined to support regardless of what else was in there. And so a lot of people voted for that package regardless of how they might feel about the Export-Import Bank. But as for a full-throated debate, yeah, that's exactly what we need. We would get that if we could actually debate the reauthorization of Export-Import on its own merits, as I think we should have done last year. We were deprived that opportunity, and now we're using every opportunity we can to have a real full-throated debate. That's why we're doing this. That's exactly the reason why we need to do this. As to the other figure you cited, the figure you cited with respect to the percentage of loans going to small businesses, sure. If you want to talk about the number of actual loans made, yeah, you can make that number look pretty good. But look at the number that I think is more significant, that only 0.5% of all small businesses in America actually benefit from XM financing. That's a pretty significant deal. And you look at how much of the lending authority in the total dollar amount that the Export-Import Bank supplies to larger businesses and businesses that, regardless of their size, could in fact obtain financing in the open market. Again, we are not back in the Great Depression anymore. This is a Great Depression era relic. So regardless of what you think about the Great Depression era dynamics at play that caused those serving in this body and in the House of Representatives in the 1930s to put this program in place. We have other challenges today, and many of those challenges are created by the government itself, by the government being too big a presence within our marketplace, inuring ultimately to the benefit of big business and harming everyone else.
Mr. President, I see other colleagues here ready to make presentations. I just want to make two final points. If you want a full-throated debate, then move the nomination out of the floor. Let's have the debate, out of the committee. Let's have the debate. That's where you're using the nomination to re-emphasize and to relitigate the XM Bank. Let's do it. In the meantime, let's appreciate that in spite of everything that's being said here, we need the bank to be competitive. We need the bank to make sure that we can, in fact, manufacture in this country. And that's something that gets lost in all the rhetoric. And I think that one of the things that we have an obligation to think about is all those jobs that are going to go someplace else, and all those Americans who are going to stand in the line for unemployment benefits and who are going to get their pink slips. And who wants to line up in the United States Senate at the factory door as they're walking through the last time and shake their hand and say, you know, too bad, you lost your job. So I yield the floor, and we intend to have further conversations about the XM Bank.